In just 2 years, one basketball player helped turn women's basketball into a completely different business. Bigger arenas, record audiences, sold-out jerseys, millions of new eyes. But here's the part nobody expected. Caitlin Clark didn't just bring fans to the WNBA. She changed what those fans were worth. And once you understand how much money followed her attention, the Caitlin Clark story looks very different. 2 years earlier, she was a college superstar in Iowa. The WNBA was already growing. Great players had already built the foundation. The league had loyal fans, established teams, and a history that stretched back decades. But something was about to happen that would push women's basketball into a completely different level of attention. Caitlin Clark. During her final season at Iowa, Clark wasn't simply putting up incredible numbers. She was turning basketball games into major television events. Her 2024 Elite Eight game against LSU attracted around 12.3 million viewers. The Final Four against UConn reached about 14.2 million. Then came the championship game. 18.9 million viewers. At the time, it became the most watched women's college basketball game ever recorded. And suddenly, there was a question bigger than basketball. What happens when that audience follows one player into the professional game? Because in sports, attention is money, and the WNBA was about to find out exactly how much. In April 2024, the Indiana Fever selected Caitlin Clark with the first overall pick. The draft itself became a massive event. Around 2.45 million people watched the 2024 WNBA draft, making it the most watched draft in WNBA history. But that was only the beginning, because now Clark wasn't playing for Iowa anymore. She was playing for Indiana, and people wanted to see her. The Fever suddenly had something every sports organization wants: demand. Tickets became more valuable. More people wanted to watch games in person. More people wanted to watch on television. More people wanted her jersey. And then something even more interesting started happening. Caitlin Clark wasn't only selling tickets in Indiana. She was traveling with the audience. When the Fever went on the road, opposing teams were benefiting from the attention surrounding her. Games were moved into larger venues. Crowds grew. And suddenly, Clark wasn't just part of the WNBA's product. She had become one of its biggest attractions. In 2024, the Indiana Fever drew 340,715 home fans, a franchise record. Their attendance increased by more than 300% compared with the previous season. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. It wasn't just attendance. It was television. The WNBA's 2024 season produced record audiences, with more than 2.35 million fans attending games across the league and national viewership reaching levels the league hadn't seen in years. And Clark's games were a major part of that explosion. One economic analysis estimated that Clark was responsible for roughly 26.5% of WNBA economic activity in 2024, considering areas such as attendance, television, and merchandise. That estimate is debated, and it doesn't mean Clark single-handedly created all of that revenue. But the number reveals something important. A superstar doesn't have to generate every dollar herself. Sometimes, her biggest value is making people care. And then there's merchandise. Clark's Fever jersey became one of the biggest-selling jerseys in women's basketball. The WNBA reported merchandise sales during the opening period of the 2024 season were up 236% year-over-year, with Clark among the league's top-selling players. Think about what that actually means. A jersey isn't just a jersey. Behind every sale are manufacturers, retailers, shipping companies, advertisers, sponsors, online stores, and millions of impressions. The attention has to travel through an entire business ecosystem, and Caitlin Clark became one of the strongest bridges between that attention and the business side of basketball. But there's something important we need to understand. The WNBA wasn't suddenly successful because Caitlin Clark arrived. That would be too simple. Women's basketball had been growing for years. Players had been building the sport. Teams had been creating loyal fan bases. The league had been developing its audience long before Clark entered the WNBA. In fact, the WNBA's 2024 season itself was historic. Attendance increased 48%. More than 2.35 million fans attended games. National television audiences reached record levels. So what did Clark actually change? She accelerated the attention. She became a gateway, someone who brought new viewers into the sport and gave them a reason to stay. A person might click on a game because they wanted to see Caitlin Clark, but then they discover Aja Wilson, Brianna Stewart, Nafisa Collier, Angel Reese, and an entire league filled with stories they had never followed before. That's the real multiplier. One superstar can create the first click. But the league has to give people a reason to keep watching. And suddenly, women's basketball wasn't only being discussed as a sport. It was being discussed as a business opportunity. Networks had more reason to invest. Brands had more reason to advertise. Teams had more reason to expand their venues and marketing. And investors had more reason to look at the league differently. Because once an audience becomes large enough, the economics change, and the numbers kept getting bigger. In 2025, an economic analysis estimated that Clark's impact could push the value associated with the WNBA toward hundreds of millions of dollars, with the possibility of crossing the billion-dollar mark. These are estimates, not guaranteed outcomes. But even the fact that analysts were seriously discussing numbers like these tells you how much the conversation had changed. 2 years earlier, Caitlin Clark was a college superstar. Then she became the face of a professional franchise. Then she became one of the biggest attractions in women's basketball. And somewhere along the way, something bigger happened. The audience stopped being a niche audience. People who had never watched women's basketball started paying attention. Not because the sport suddenly became good. It had always been good. But because millions of people suddenly had a reason to look. And that is the real power of a superstar. Caitlin Clark didn't invent women's basketball. She didn't build the WNBA alone. And she certainly wasn't the only reason the league grew. But she arrived at a moment when the sport was ready for a breakthrough. And she amplified it. Performance created attention. Attention created demand. Demand created money. And money created new opportunities for an entire league. That's why the Caitlin Clark story isn't just a basketball story. It's a media story, a marketing story, a business story, and ultimately, it's a story about attention. Because when millions of people suddenly decide that something is worth watching, the value of that thing can change almost overnight. And Caitlin Clark may have shown the sports world exactly how powerful that attention can be. The Clark era may be about much more than one player. It may be about what happens when an entire sport finally gets the audience it was waiting for. Subscribe.